She has brought a bastard into this house. The words, spoken by his aunt, Lady Beatrice, sliced through the stifling air of the blue drawing room. They were cold, precise, and aimed to kill. Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, turned his gaze from the rain lashing against the tall windows to the woman he had married 6 months prior. Alara stood by the hearth, her hand frozen midway to adjusting a porcelain shepherdess on the mantel. Her face, usually a study in placid composure, was utterly blank. It was the terrifying emptiness that precedes a building's collapse. Between them, held by the firm, almost proprietary hand of Lady Beatrice, stood a small boy. He could be no more than 2 years of age, with a thick mess of dark hair and eyes so deeply brown they were almost black. He clutched a worn wooden soldier, his expression one of solemn confusion. Alistair felt a familiar coldness seep into his bones, a frost that had lived there since the death of his first wife, Genevieve. He had married Alara out of duty. He required an heir, and she was of good family, quiet, and seemingly without complication. He had made his terms clear, not in words but in the glacial distance he maintained. His heart was a mausoleum, and he had no intention of letting anyone else in. He demanded only one thing: fidelity. An heir, when it came, must be his, unquestionably. What is the meaning of this, Beatrice? His voice was low, a dangerous rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. The meaning, Your Grace, Beatrice said, her tone dripping with false sympathy, is that your Duchess has a secret. A son. One she has kept hidden away in some country hovel until she felt secure enough to bring him into your home. Alara's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Her entire world had tilted on its axis. The air grew thick, smelling of beeswax and deceit. She could feel the heat of the fire on her back and the ice of Alistair's stare on her front. It was a physical assault. That is a lie, she finally whispered. The words were flimsy things, moths against a hurricane. Alistair's eyes, a startling pale grey that always seemed to hold a hint of winter storms, narrowed on her. He did not see a terrified young woman trapped in a web of malice. He saw the embodiment of his deepest fear, betrayal, the ultimate defilement of his name, his home, his trust. Genevieve had been perfect, a saint of his own making. This new wife was a viper he had welcomed into his nest. Look at him, Alistair, Beatrice urged, nudging the little boy forward. He has her hair, the same fine texture. He was discovered with a nursemaid who confessed everything. She was paid to keep him in a village not 20 miles from her family's estate. Every word was a carefully forged link in a chain being wrapped around Alara's neck. She had never seen the child before this moment. She had no secret lover, no hidden past. Her life had been an open book of tedious aristocratic propriety. But looking at Alistair's face, she knew the truth did not matter. He wanted to believe it. Her quietness, her unassuming nature, which he had once seen as virtues, were now recast as signs of a cunning, deceitful nature. Alistair, she tried again, her voice gaining a sliver of strength, I swear to you, on my father's name, I do not know this child. He took a step toward her. He was a large man, his power not just in his title but in his physical presence. He stopped before the hearth looming over her. He did not look at her face but at the child, who now hid behind Beatrice's skirts. My only requirement, he said, his voice devoid of all emotion, a flat, dead thing, was that you be faithful, that you not bring another woman's child into this house and attempt to pass it off as my own. He finally lifted his eyes to hers, and what she saw there broke her more than any shout could have. It was a profound, bottomless contempt. You have failed in the singular duty I asked of you. The injustice of it was a physical nausea. He was her husband. He had vowed to protect her, yet he stood there, a judge and jury, convicting her on the venomous words of a jealous aunt without a moment's hesitation. The life she had been living, a gilded cage of loneliness and duty, was revealed to be a prison built on sand. And the tide had just come in. Get out, he said. The 2 words were delivered with the finality of a headsman's axe. Alistair, please, she begged, the last of her pride crumbling. You cannot do this. I can, and I will. He turned away from her, a gesture of dismissal so complete it stole the very air from her lungs. Beatrice, see that she is provided a carriage. She may take her personal effects, nothing more. She is no longer welcome at Blackwood. She is no longer my wife in any sense but the legal one, and that I shall remedy as swiftly as the law allows. He was already walking away, his back a rigid wall of condemnation. Elara stood, trembling, the porcelain shepherdess still on the mantel, a monument to a life that had ended a moment ago. Her gaze fell to the little boy, who peeked out from behind the black silk of Beatrice's gown. His dark eyes were wide, taking in the scene with a child's unnerving solemnity. He was a pawn, a weapon used to destroy her. But he was also a child, frightened and alone. Beatrice smiled, a thin, triumphant curve of her lips. "The carriage will be ready in 1 hour, Your Grace," she said, the title now a mocking barb. "Or should I say, my lady?" Elara did not answer. The house, which had never felt like a home, now felt like a tomb. The air was heavy with the scent of rain and rot. She turned and walked from the room, her steps unnaturally steady. She did not look back. There was nothing left to see. Upstairs, in the opulent suite of rooms that had been hers, the silence was a deafening roar. Her lady's maid was gone, already dismissed or reassigned by the ruthlessly efficient Beatrice. Elara was alone. She moved through the space like a ghost, her fingers trailing over the silk of the bedspread, the cool marble of her dressing table. It all felt alien, props from a play in which she had been horribly miscast. Her eyes fell upon the jewelry box. Inside, diamonds and pearls lay like captured starlight, gifts from Alistair, not given with love but with the detached obligation of a duke providing for his duchess. They were shackles, not adornments. She closed the lid. On the mantel, nestled amongst silver-framed miniatures, sat the Blackwood sapphire. It was her wedding ring, a stone as deep and cold as the sea in winter, flanked by diamonds. It was a famous piece, a symbol of the Duchess's station. She slipped it from her finger. The skin beneath was pale, indented, a scar of ownership. She placed the ring carefully on the cold marble, leaving it where he would undoubtedly find it. A final, silent statement. Her mind, which had been a maelstrom of shock and pain, began to clear, replaced by a cold, sharp pragmatism. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. She had been cast out. She had no family to run to. Her parents were gone, and her only living relative was a distant cousin who would sooner slam the door in her face than risk the wrath of a duke. She was utterly alone. No, not entirely. An image of the small, dark-eyed boy flashed in her mind. He was the instrument of her ruin, yet he was innocent in it. What would become of him? Beatrice had used him. She would have no further need for him. Would she cast him aside? Send him to an orphanage? The thought sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the damp air. She went to her wardrobe and ignored the dozens of elaborate gowns. At the very back, she found what she was looking for, a simple, dark wool traveling dress, sturdy and practical. She changed quickly. From a small, locked drawer in her writing desk, she retrieved a velvet pouch. Inside was £50, her personal allowance. It was a pittance to a duchess, but a fortune to a fugitive. Dressed, she stood in the center of the room and took one last look. She was shedding a skin, leaving behind Lady Elara, Duchess of Blackwood. Whoever she would become, she would be forged in this moment of annihilation. A quiet resolve settled over her. She would not leave that child to the mercy of a woman like Beatrice. It was an illogical, insane impulse. Taking him would only confirm Alistair's belief in her guilt. But in that moment, her own reputation ceased to matter. All that mattered was the profound injustice done to them both. He was a victim, just as she was. She slipped out of her rooms and moved silently down the servants' staircase, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She knew Beatrice would have put the child somewhere out of the way, likely in one of the lesser-used guest rooms in the east wing. She found him in a small cold room, sitting on the edge of a vast canopied bed. A maid she did not recognize stood guard by the door, looking uncomfortable. "I am here for the boy," Elara said, her voice steady. The maid looked flustered. Lady Beatrice said. "Lady Beatrice is not the Duchess of Blackwood," Elara said, infusing her voice with a lifetime of command she had rarely used. "I am. Now step aside." The maid, cowed by the unexpected authority, hesitated and then moved. Elara walked to the bed and knelt. The little boy looked at her, his dark eyes wide and unblinking. He didn't cry, he simply watched her. "What is your name?" she asked softly. He shook his head, clutching his wooden soldier. "It's all right," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "I am not going to hurt you." She held out a hand. "Will you come with me?" He stared at her hand, then at her face. For a long moment, he did nothing. Then, slowly, he placed his small, warm hand in hers. It was a startling, profound act of trust. A current of fierce, protective instinct shot through Elara. It was an entirely new sensation, and it was stronger than her fear, stronger than her grief. "Come," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She led him from the room, past the stunned maid, and down the winding back stairs. The hour was nearly up. The carriage would be waiting at the main entrance. They would be seen. She did not care. She emerged into the grand hall just as Beatrice was descending the main staircase, a look of smug satisfaction on her face. The look vanished when she saw Elara, dressed for travel, holding the boy's hand. "What do you think you are doing?" Beatrice hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "I am leaving," Elara said, her voice ringing with newfound clarity in the cavernous space, "as I was instructed, and I am taking the evidence of my supposed crime with me." Beatrice's face paled. This was not part of her plan. "You will not. The boy stays." "Does he?" Elara arched an eyebrow. "And what is your claim to him, Beatrice? What will you do with him now that he has served his purpose? He is a duke's son, is he not? Or so you claim. Surely he cannot be abandoned." She let the barb hang in the air. For a moment, Beatrice was speechless. She had expected tears, pleas, a broken woman. She had not expected this cold, defiant stranger. Outside, the crunch of gravel announced the carriage. "You will regret this," Beatrice snarled. "I already regret a great many things," Elara replied, pulling the child a little closer. "This will not be one of them." She turned her back on her tormentor and walked out of the great doors of Blackwood Manor, leading the small, silent boy into the rain and an unknown future. The door closed behind them with a boom that sounded like the end of the world. The journey was a blur of grey skies and muddy roads. The child, whose name she eventually learned was Leo, remained mostly silent. He sat beside her in the rocking carriage, his small body tense, his eyes fixed on the passing landscape. He did not cry, but a profound sadness radiated from him. Elara had directed the driver to a crossroads town 3 hours distant, a place large enough to be anonymous. From there, she paid him handsomely for his silence and his vehicle, a small but sturdy carriage that was far less conspicuous than the ducal coach. She bought 2 tired horses and, with her remaining funds, set a course for the remote north, a place of moors and coastline where no one would think to look for a disgraced duchess. The first few weeks were a crucible. Elara, who had never so much as dressed herself, learned to harness horses, to cook over an open fire, to haggle for lodgings at grim, unwelcoming inns. The £50 dwindled with alarming speed. Her soft hands became chapped, then calloused. Her silks were traded for rough-spun wool. Through it all, Leo was her shadow. He began to talk, his vocabulary small, but his observations sharp. He would point out a bird or a strangely shaped cloud. At night, he would sometimes wake from nightmares, and she would hold him, murmuring nonsense until he fell back asleep in her arms. A bond formed between them, forged in shared exile and whispered comforts in the dark. She was no longer just his protector, she was his mother in every way that mattered. They finally found their haven in a small, wind-swept fishing village called Oakhaven. It clung to the cliffs of the North Sea, a place that smelled perpetually of salt and wood smoke. It was as far from the perfumed drawing rooms of London as she could imagine. Here, she became Mrs. Elara Finch, a widow from the south whose husband had been lost at sea. The story was thin, but no one in Oakhaven cared enough to question it. She used the last of her money to rent 2 small rooms above the village's only inn, the Anchor. The innkeeper, a stout, no-nonsense woman named Martha Gable, looked her over with shrewd eyes but asked no prying questions. She saw a lady in rough clothes with a quiet child and an air of deep sorrow. "You'll need to work," Martha stated simply. "Rent's due every Friday." "I will do anything," Elara said, and she meant it. She started in the kitchens, scrubbing pots and peeling potatoes until her back ached and her fingers were raw. The other staff were wary of her at first. Her speech was too refined, her posture too straight, but her work ethic was undeniable. She never complained. She learned to bake bread, to mend fishing nets, to keep the inn's accounts. The physical exhaustion was a blessing. It left no room for the ghosts of her past. 5 years passed. The soft, hesitant duchess was gone, burned away by hardship. In her place was a woman of quiet strength. Her beauty had not faded, but had been honed, stripped of its artifice. There were fine lines around her eyes now, from squinting into the sun and from worry. Her hands were never fully clean. She was respected in Oakhaven. She was one of them. Leo, now nearly 7, was a bright, curious boy. He had Elara's gentle nature but a fierce intelligence that was all his own. He had no memory of Blackwood Manor or the woman who had used him as a weapon. Ilara was his mother. Oakhaven was his world. He knew the name of every fishing boat in the harbor and could identify seabirds by their calls. He was happy. His happiness was Ilara's shield against the bitterness that sometimes threatened to consume her in the dead of night. Back at Blackwood Manor, the silence Alistair had once cultivated had become his torment. The house was a vast, empty mausoleum echoing with regret. Beatrice had tried to consolidate her power, suggesting new brides, managing his affairs, filling the silence with her incessant, cloying chatter, but the spell was broken. His aunt's triumph had been short-lived. Without Ilara as a target, Beatrice's manipulations became more transparent, her greed more obvious. Alistair began to see her not as his trusted advisor, but as a vulture who had been circling his grief. The seed of doubt had been planted the day Ilara left. Her defiance, her inexplicable decision to take the child, had been a discordant note in Beatrice's perfectly composed symphony of deceit. It made no sense. Why would a guilty woman burden herself with the very evidence of her crime? A year after Ilara's departure, driven by a gnawing unease, Alistair had found the Blackwood sapphire on the mantel in the blue drawing room. It sat there, collecting a fine layer of dust, an emblem of all he had thrown away. He had picked it up, the stone cold against his skin, and the first true crack had appeared in his certainty. He hired a man in London, a discreet investigator named Finch. He gave him Ilara's maiden name and a simple instruction: find out everything. He expected to receive a sordid history of secret lovers and clandestine meetings. The reports that came back told a different story. Lady Ilara's life before her marriage had been impeccably, almost boringly, proper. There were no secrets, no unexplained trips, no gentleman callers. Finch's inquiries into her life after she left Blackwood yielded nothing. She had vanished. Alistair then had Finch investigate the child. Beatrice had claimed the nursemaid confessed, but the woman was nowhere to be found. The village where she had supposedly lived with Leo had no record of them. The entire story began to feel flimsy, fabricated. The investigation stalled for years. Alistair lived in a grey limbo, haunted by a crime he was no longer certain had been committed. The emptiness of his life was a constant, dull ache. He had cast out his wife, his duchess, on the word of a woman he now deeply distrusted, and in doing so, had hollowed out his own existence. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former maid of his first wife, Genevieve, now old and riddled with guilt, sought out Finch in London. She told him a story that chilled Alistair to the bone. Genevieve had not spent the last months of her life resting at a seaside resort, as he had been told. She had been sent away by Beatrice, who managed the household during her illness, to a private clinic in the countryside. There, in secret, she had given birth to a son, Alistair's son. The birth had been difficult, and Genevieve, already frail, knew she was dying. She had written a letter to Alistair, explaining everything, begging him to find their child and protect him from Beatrice, whom she had long feared. She entrusted the letter to a maid. That maid, threatened by Beatrice, had burned the letter, but she had, in a moment of panicked defiance, torn off and kept a small corner of it. Finch acquired the fragment. It contained only a few words in Genevieve's familiar hand. Our son Leo, keep him safe from... The world stopped. Leo, the name of the child his aunt had brought before him, the child he had believed to be Ilara's bastard. It was his own son, his and Genevieve's, the legitimate heir to the dukedom of Blackwood. The scale of Beatrice's betrayal was monstrous, breathtaking in its cruelty. She had not only hidden the existence of his son, but had used the boy to destroy his second marriage and ruin an innocent woman. She had preyed on his grief, his pride, his coldness, and he had let her. He had been her willing instrument. The contempt he had felt for Ilara that day was nothing compared to the self-loathing that now consumed him. He had not just been a fool, he had been a monster. He had cast his wife out into the wilderness for an imaginary crime, while his true crime, his blind, arrogant cruelty, was unforgivable. And Ilara, she had taken his son. Not knowing who he was, she had taken a helpless child and protected him from the very fate Alistair should have saved him from. While he had sat in his empty mansion, drowning in self-pity, she had been out in the world, alone, raising his heir. A desperate, frantic energy seized him. He had to find her. He had to find his son. Finch, with renewed purpose and unlimited funds, redoubled his efforts. He cast a wide net, searching for a woman of gentle birth with a young son living in obscurity. The name she had used, Finch, was a bitter irony Alistair did not miss. It took 6 more months, but he finally traced a whisper of her to the remote northern coast. Alistair rode for Oakhaven himself, pushing his horse to the point of exhaustion. He arrived in the village on a blustery afternoon. The place smelled of fish and damp earth. It was a world away from the manicured lawns of Blackwood. He felt like an alien, his fine clothes and imposing presence drawing stares from the weathered-looking fishermen mending their nets. He found the Anchor Inn and was directed to Mrs. Finch's rooms. He took the narrow, rickety stairs 2 at a time, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He knocked, his hand trembling slightly. The door opened, and there she was. It was Ilara, but not the woman he remembered. The softness was gone, replaced by a resilience that seemed etched into her very bones. She was thinner, and her hands, resting on the doorframe, were not the pale, smooth hands of a duchess, but her eyes, when they met his, held the same startling clarity, and something else, the cold, wary look of a survivor. Her recognition was immediate. Her face went pale, and her eyes widened, not with fear, but with a sudden, sharp anger. "You," she breathed, the word a curse. "Ilara," he said, his voice hoarse. Before he could say more, a small voice piped up from inside the room. "Mama, who is it?" A boy appeared at her side, peering up at the tall stranger. He had dark, unruly hair and serious, intelligent eyes. Genevieve's eyes, his eyes, the Beaumont eyes. It was like looking at a portrait of his own childhood. The sight of him, healthy and real, stole the breath from Alistair's lungs. He felt a crack go through the frozen landscape of his heart, a painful thawing agony. "Leo," he whispered, the name a prayer. Ilara's body went rigid. She moved instinctively, shielding Leo behind her, her hand on his shoulder. Her expression hardened into a mask of fierce, unyielding protection. "You have no right to say his name," she said, her voice low and shaking with fury. "You have no right to be here. Get out." "Ilara, please," he begged, taking a step forward. "You don't understand. I know everything." "You know nothing," she shot back, her voice rising. "You knew nothing 5 years ago, and you know nothing now. You see a child and a woman you threw away like garbage, and you think you can just appear at our door? What do you want, your grace? Have you come to finish the job? To cast us out of this hovel as well?" The title was a slap in the face. The bitterness in her voice was a poison he had brewed himself, and now he was being forced to drink it. "He is my son," Alistair said, the words raw and broken. "Leo is my son, mine and Genevieve's." Ilara froze. For a moment, the world seemed to stop spinning. She stared at him, searching his face for the trick, the lie. But all she saw was a desperate, ragged anguish that mirrored the one she had hidden for so long. The pieces began to fall into place with dizzying speed. The boy's age, the secret of his past, the sheer diabolical cruelty of Beatrice's plan. But the understanding brought no relief, only a fresh wave of rage. "And you believed I was an adulteress," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You believed I would bring another woman's child into your home and lie to your face. You believed the word of that viper over your own wife. It took you 5 years to uncover a truth that was right in front of you. 5 years, Alistair." She pushed Leo gently back into the room behind her. "We have a life here, a good life. It is hard and it is poor, but it is ours, and it is honest. We do not want you in it." She moved to close the door. He put his hand against it, his strength easily overpowering hers. "Ilara, I will not leave. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I know I have not earned it. I may never earn it. But I will not leave my son. He is not your son," she said, her words like shards of ice. "You forfeited that right when you threw him out with me. He is my son. I have fed him. I have clothed him. I have held him when he was sick. I have been his mother and his father. Where were you?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable. "I was a fool," he said, his voice cracking. "A blind, arrogant fool, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to atone for it. But I am here now." "Go back to your empty castle, your grace," she said, her eyes welling with tears she refused to let fall. "You are not wanted here." She slammed the door in his face. The sound echoed in the narrow hall. Alistair stood there, the wood of the door against his forehead, and for the first time since Genevieve's death, he wept. He did not weep for his lost love or his loneliness. He wept for the woman and the child on the other side of the door, and for the man he had failed to be. He did not leave Oakhaven. That evening, he sought out the innkeeper, Martha Gable. He rented a room for the night, his presence causing a stir in the common room. The next day, he found a small, dilapidated fisherman's cottage for rent at the edge of the village, its windows staring out at the grey, churning sea. It was damp, smelled of brine and disuse, and was furnished with little more than a cot, a table, and a chair. He paid a year's rent in advance, in cash. The villagers watched him with open suspicion. Dukes did not rent derelict cottages. He ignored their stares. He bought rough work clothes, an axe, and a saw. The first thing he did was chop the gnarled, fallen branches in the cottage's small yard, stacking the wood neatly. It was mindless, back-breaking work. His hands, accustomed to holding reins and signing documents, were blistered and raw within an hour. He welcomed the pain. It was a tangible penance. He did not approach Ilara again. He respected the boundary of her slammed door. But he began a silent, one-man siege. Every morning, before the sun was fully up, he would leave a stack of freshly chopped firewood on the back step of the inn, just below her rooms. He learned from the village gossip that Leo loved the sweet buns from the bakery in the next town over. He rode there twice a week and had them delivered to Martha Gable, with strict instructions that they were a gift for the boy, with no mention of the sender. He saw the village doctor making a call at the inn one afternoon and, in a panic, tracked the man down later, pressing a heavy purse into his hand and making him swear to provide for Ilara and Leo's care for the next year, no questions asked. Ilara knew it was him. The firewood was a silent, daily reminder of his presence. The sweet buns for Leo were a calculated strike at her heart. She wanted to be furious, to throw the wood back into the street and refuse the gifts. But she could not deny her son the small joy. Nor could she deny the relief of having a well-stocked woodpile as winter approached. His strategy was maddeningly effective. He was not demanding or begging. He was serving. He was doing the work she had done for 5 years, the thankless, physical labor of survival. He was also systematically dismantling Beatrice's life. From his grim little cottage, he dispatched letters to Mr. Finch. He instructed him to find the clinic where Genevieve had given birth, to find the distant cousin who had first cared for Leo. Armed with the maid's confession, Finch unraveled the conspiracy with ruthless efficiency. The cousin, terrified of being implicated, confessed everything about how Beatrice had threatened her and taken the child. The clinic's records, though altered, still held traces of the truth. Alistair summoned Beatrice to Blackwood. She arrived expecting to find him wallowing in his usual melancholy. Instead, she found him in his study, flanked by his solicitor and Mr. Finch. He was no longer the grieving, malleable man she had controlled for years. He was the Duke of Blackwood, cold, focused, and utterly implacable. He laid the evidence before her, piece by damning piece, the fragment of Genevieve's letter, the maid's sworn testimony, the cousin's confession. Beatrice crumbled. Her denials were weak, her blustering pathetic. Alistair was merciless. He did not simply banish her. He stripped her of her allowance, her properties, and her status. He sent a detailed account of her crimes to the heads of the most powerful families in the peerage, ensuring every door in London would be closed to her. He socially and financially annihilated her, leaving her with nothing but her name and the infamy that would now be permanently attached to it. It was a cold, brutal, and public execution of her character, designed to ensure she could never harm anyone again. And it was done, most importantly, to clear Ilara's name. He returned to Oakhaven carrying a leather satchel filled with the signed confessions and documents. He felt no triumph, only a bone-deep weariness. Destroying Beatrice had not been an act of vengeance. It had been a necessary cleansing, like lancing a wound that had festered for years. He walked to the inn in the late afternoon. He saw Ilara in the small yard behind it, hanging laundry on a line. The wind whipped strands of hair across her face. Leo was playing nearby, chasing seagulls on the muddy flat of the low tide. It was a scene of such simple domestic peace that it made Alistair's chest ache. She saw him approach and stiffened, her hand stilled on the line. He stopped a respectful distance away. "I am not here to ask you for anything," he said, his voice quiet against the wind. "I am here only to give you this." He set the satchel on a weathered bench between them. "It is the truth, all of it. The confessions of everyone involved, proof of what Beatrice did, proof of your innocence, not that you should ever have had to prove it." She stared at the satchel, then at him. Her expression was unreadable. "I have dealt with Beatrice," he continued. "She will never trouble you or anyone again. I have also made arrangements to have your name and reputation formally and publicly restored." "My reputation?" A short, bitter laugh escaped her. "My reputation is that of a hard-working baker and laundress in a fishing village. It is a good reputation, and I earned it myself. I have no need of the one you seek to restore." Her words were a deserved rebuke. He flinched but held his ground. "I know," he said softly. "I know. This is not for you. It is for me. It is the first step in a debt I can never fully repay." He paused, his gaze shifting to Leo, who was now digging in the sand with a piece of driftwood. He deserves to know his story, the true one, when he is old enough. He deserves to know his mother was a hero and his father was a coward. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving the satchel on the bench. He did not look back. He had laid his penance at her feet. The next move, if there was to be one, had to be hers. That night, after Leo was asleep, Ilara opened the satchel. By the light of a single candle, she read the documents. She saw the story of Genevieve's secret, Beatrice's monstrous plot, and Alistair's dawning, horrifying realization. It was all there, in black and white, the truth she had always known in her heart, now proven beyond all doubt. She felt no vindication, only a profound, hollow sadness for all of them. For Genevieve, who had died trying to protect her son, for the child who had been used as a pawn, for the man who had been so blinded by grief that he had allowed himself to be twisted into a monster, and for herself for the years she had lost. A week later, the autumn rains turned to a vicious, freezing storm that battered the coast. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, and the sea crashed against the cliffs with a sound like cannon fire. In the middle of the second night of the storm, Ilara was woken by a small hot hand on her face. "Mama," Leo whimpered, "I don't feel well." He was burning with fever. His breathing was shallow and ragged. Ilara's blood ran cold. The village doctor was old and lived a mile away, across a path that would now be a treacherous river of mud. No one would be able to travel in this storm. Panic, an emotion she had kept at bay for 5 years, seized her with icy claws. She bathed Leo's forehead with cool water, but the fever only seemed to climb. He grew delirious, muttering about seagulls and ships lost in the fog. Desperate, she threw a heavy cloak over her nightdress and ran from the inn, out into the teeth of the gale. The wind and rain tore at her, but she didn't care. She ran, stumbling through the mud and darkness, not to the doctor's house, but to the one place she knew she could find help. She pounded on the door of the fisherman's cottage. It was thrown open almost immediately. Alistair stood there, silhouetted against the dim light of a lantern. He was fully dressed, as if he had been waiting. "It's Leo," she gasped, her words snatched away by the wind. "He's sick. A fever. I can't get the doctor." He did not hesitate. "Go back to him," he commanded, his voice a firm anchor in the chaos of the storm. "I will get the doctor." "You can't," she cried. "The road is impassable." "I will find a way," he said. And in his eyes, she saw a raw, absolute determination she had never seen before. He was already pulling on a heavy oilskin coat. He was gone before she could say another word. Ilara ran back to the inn, her heart torn between terror for her son and a new bewildering flicker of hope. Alistair rode his horse into the tempest. It was not a ride, it was a battle against the elements. The path was washed out, as she had feared. He was forced to dismount and lead the horse through treacherous, knee-deep mud, the wind threatening to throw them both from the cliffside. He fell multiple times, his fine clothes tearing, his body bruised and battered. But he never stopped. He thought only of the small, feverish boy and the terrified woman waiting for him. This was his penance in action, not firewood or money, but this, a desperate, dangerous act of service. He reached the doctor's house hours later, looking like a wraith risen from the sea. He did not ask, he demanded. He hauled the old doctor from his bed and half carried him back through the storm, shielding the older man with his own body. They arrived back at the anchor just before dawn, soaked, freezing, and exhausted. Alistair stood outside Ilara's door, dripping onto the wooden floor while the doctor went inside. He did not presume to enter. He just waited, his hands clenched, his entire being focused on the sounds from within the room. He waited for hours. He heard the murmur of voices, Leo's occasional cry, Ilara's soothing whispers. Martha Gable brought him a blanket and a mug of hot tea, which he accepted without a word. Finally, as the storm began to subside with the morning light, the door opened. The doctor emerged, looking weary but relieved. "The fever has broken," he announced. "It was a severe inflammation of the lungs, but he is a strong lad. He will recover. His mother is with him." The doctor looked at Alistair, at his muddy, torn clothes and bruised face. "He is very lucky you went for me, Your Grace. Another few hours—" He left the sentence unfinished. Alistair sagged against the wall, relief so profound it left him weak. A moment later, Ilara appeared in the doorway. Her face was pale and tear-streaked, but her eyes were clear. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time since his arrival. She saw not the arrogant duke who had condemned her, but a man who had walked through hell for her son, for his son. "Thank you," she whispered. The words were small, but they held the weight of the whole world. He simply nodded, his throat too tight to speak. She hesitated, then said, "You should come in. Sit with him." It was the invitation he had not dared to hope for. He entered the room slowly. Leo was asleep in his small bed, his breathing, even now, his face peaceful. Alistair pulled a chair to the bedside and simply sat, watching his son breathe. Ilara sat in a chair on the other side. They did not speak. They just shared the quiet space, two sentinels guarding their sleeping child. In the days that followed, as Leo recovered, the wall between them began to crumble. Alistair would visit every day, bringing a book to read to Leo or a small carved toy. He never overstayed his welcome. He would talk to Leo about horses and castles, and Leo in turn would tell him about the fishing boats. One afternoon, as Alistair was leaving, Ilara walked with him to the door. "I read the documents," she said quietly. He stopped, his back to her. "I see. I am sorry for what happened to Genevieve," she said, "and I am sorry that you were deceived for so long." He turned to face her. "Ilara, you have nothing to be sorry for. Everything that happened was my fault, my pride, my blindness. You were grieving," she offered, a small token of grace. "Grief is not an excuse for cruelty," he said, his voice raw. "I built a shrine to her memory, and in doing so, I desecrated my life with you. I failed you, in every way a man can fail his wife. I see that now." She looked down at her hands, the hands of a working woman. "That woman, the Duchess of Blackwood, I don't know who she is anymore." "I do," he said softly. "She is the woman who showed more courage and compassion in one night than I have shown in my entire life. She is the woman who raised my son, kept him safe, and taught him love, while I did nothing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the Blackwood sapphire. It shone, clean and brilliant, in the palm of his hand. "Blackwood is nothing without its Duchess, and I am nothing without you." He did not try to put the ring on her finger. He simply held it out to her. She looked at the ring, then at his face. She saw the regret, the shame, but also a deep, abiding sincerity. She saw a man who had been broken and was trying to piece himself back together, not as a duke, but as a man. Slowly, she reached out and took the ring from his palm. She did not put it on. She simply closed her fingers around it, the cool metal a familiar weight. "Leo loves the sea," she said, changing the subject. "He has never known anything else." "The sea is at Blackwood too," Alistair said gently. "From the West Tower, you can see for miles." It was not a demand, it was an offering, an image of a different life. They returned to Blackwood a month later, not as a duke and his disgraced wife, but as a family. The journey was the reverse of her flight 5 years earlier, but this time, the carriage was filled not with silence and fear, but with Leo's excited chatter. Blackwood Manor was changed. Alistair had dismissed the servants who had been loyal to Beatrice and promoted those who had shown kindness to Ilara in her brief time there. The house felt lighter, the air cleaner. Their life was not the same. It could never be. The power dynamic had been irrevocably altered. They were partners now, equals forged in a crucible of betrayal and atonement. He deferred to her in all matters concerning Leo and the household. He sought her counsel on his own affairs. He courted her, slowly, patiently, with small acts of kindness and a respect that bordered on reverence. He learned the names of the fishermen in Oakhaven and established a fund to support their families. He and Ilara worked together to found a school for the children in the villages on his estate, using their power not for social climbing, but to correct the kind of injustices they now understood so intimately. One evening, months after their return, they stood on the balcony of the West Tower, watching the sun set over the distant sea. Leo was asleep downstairs, safe in the nursery that had been prepared for him. The air was cool and smelled of salt and damp earth, a scent that no longer meant exile, but home. "Do you ever miss it?" Alistair asked quietly. "Your life in Oakhaven?" Ilara was silent for a long moment. "I miss Martha," she said. "I miss the smell of the bakery in the morning, but I do not miss the fear or the loneliness." She turned to him, her expression serene in the twilight. "I am not that woman anymore, Alistair, but I am grateful for what she taught me." She held up her left hand. The Blackwood sapphire was on her finger. She had put it there that morning, a silent acceptance. He took her hand, his touch gentle. "I am not that man anymore either," he said, "and I thank God for it every day." He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of desperate passion or dutiful obligation. It was a kiss of quiet understanding, of shared history, and of a future they would build together, on a foundation not of title or duty, but of earned trust and a love that had been lost and miraculously found again. The silence that surrounded them was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. It was home.